Hello everyone, I'm Cynthia Miller and this is our class for the cute little brown mushrooms. And I'm just pointing out some different areas of highlights and where the darker areas are. So just sort of look at the picture in blocks, blocks of dark and blocks of light. And I'm going to lead you through how to make this happen. So this circle here, I want you to really pay attention to that because we're going to be painting around that when we do the mushrooms. But first we're going to start with putting some water in the background. And this is my nice little mop brush. I'm using emerald green and a little bit of dusk green. But first, get some water on the back, and then we're going to put a little bit of a background in. I did the first set of mushrooms, and there was no background, and they looked a little bit stark. I'll show you a picture of them. They don't have the background, so when we're doing the background, you want to make it sort of fun and light, and sort of coming from the subject outward. And so when you have water on your paper, you can just splash some color on there. Wherever it lands, just smush it around with your brush. And so make sure you get into all the little nooks and crannies around the mushrooms so you don't have that white. Here's a picture of the mushrooms with no background. And so they look more botanical. So here I'm just sprinkling on some more dusk green. If you get it on the mushrooms, just sop it up with a tissue real quick and you'll be good to go. I think I spent a lot of time doing the background, but I wanted the green to go right up beside the mushrooms. I want the mushrooms to stand out from the green. And just remember that your colors will dry quite a bit lighter in tone than when you did them. When you paint them, they look darker. So I'm just going to start into the stems of the small one, the three of them, with the burnt umber. And my goal is to mix the bottom grass area with the bottom of the stem, because I want it to look like it's sitting in the grass. I don't want them to be separate. I don't want one to be sitting on top of the grass, and then the grass, like it's sort of, you really have to pay attention to how that looks in the front. So I'll show you what I do is, just put the green in at the bottom while you're doing the stems so that they blend in nicely. And when you're finishing it, you just do small flicks of grass upwards and small flicks of the brown downwards into the grass. So it looks like there's these flicks going both ways. I sort of wanted to make sure that you understood that, right? So when you're doing the small stems at the very end, you're going to bring the brown down into the grass as if it were little spikes of grass. And I'm just pointing out I'm sort of playing with the colors, but I ended up covering this all up anyways. I think I was just sort of playing with the light that I had in there. But you have to really think about the light coming in from the top, and then these smaller ones, I figured they would be a little bit darker. Two brushes I'm using are number 4 and number 6, and the larger one I'm using for the caps. Now I did put water in there, just clean water first, and now I'm dropping in this beautiful rich burnt umber, and I am trying to mimic the look of velvet. Sometimes you come across these big mushrooms and they just look like these beautiful textures to them, just like velvet, like it's just so magnificent. So I'm painting around the circle that I was pointed out originally, and you can see it's going to be white, and we'll sort of play with it afterwards. But I also left a little bit of white at the cap, and you'll see as I sort of play with that a little bit more, it becomes another place where you can sort of make some textures. The way that I see these mushrooms is that there's just so much texture to them. And so I'm adding a little bit of the dark to the bottom of the rim of the cap. And I ended up circling the white mark on the cap with I'm just sort of shaking the end of my brush onto the line. So number one, it's covering up the pencil line, but it gives a really sort of rough look to it, as if it has been torn or weathered a little bit. As you know, the bigger ones are more weathered looking, right? So that gorgeous dark tone in there, I love it. And here's a way to make some more textured areas. Just dab your paint in there, dab your water in there, just sort of vibrate your brush through there. And I'm doing the same here, just up and down taps with really a lot of pigment on my brush. But the paper's wet, right? So it's blending sort of into the cap and as well as down over the sides of the cap. And I thought while I have this dark pigment on my brush, I would put in the edges there. And what I'm doing now is just bringing in some water. I've cleaned my brush and I'm bringing in some water to soften up the edges around there. Remember, I had put some really dark edges in there. And now this is a rigger brush, and this really helps to give it some dimension. You know, these are round, but it's you know, there's tricks to making your flat paper look like round little mushrooms, right? So yeah, just using that dark tone that's on this rigger brush and giving it some really fine lines, because this is what the inside of mushrooms look like, right? Little bits of texture and light, almost snow white in some of them. And these are the kind of mushrooms that have this sort of white flesh sort of falling out of the cap all around them. So I'm putting lots of little marks on there, trying to use different strokes, and right now I'm just putting in a line of shadow to make the bottom part of this white piece look like it's going back in, because it sort of puffs out and then it goes back in, and the way that you reseed it is to put a little bit of a line along there. And now I'm wetting down the other cap. We're going to have a go on that one as well. I love doing this kind of work because it's just so fun. You can just play and see how it turns out. So again, I'll do the darker area on the left side of the cap. We're assuming that the light is coming sort of not straight down, but top right more. And we'll want to have the same highlights, sort of looking the same angles on all the mushrooms. So I'm just trying to use curved brush strokes, both the tips and on its side upward, so that the streaks of paint that get left behind after that stroke are poofy, you know. And then I go and do that, and adding some more dark there and adding some more texture. I love the way that the dark rims really make the rims take the shape on, right? And I think that, you know, you can play and play and play, but you sort of have to come to a time where that's enough, because it gets overworked, right? And let the water do some work. Let the water move it around. And if you don't have enough water on there, you can add a bit more. Now I'm using my brush. It's not the smallest, but I am doing a little bit of work there with that number 2, I believe. Every time you put a dark rim around it, it'll pull it in a little bit. So just putting a little bit more texture on this one. So we played around with some color. We've got the Indian yellow and sap green for the snails, and they're actually quite a bit more yellow than you might think. And I just I think the challenge was to get them to look like they're sitting in the grass, right? So just play with that. I'm going to start on the stems now, and as long as your background is dry, go ahead. And what I'm doing is painting around the caps of the small ones. So I think because the white caps are in front of the big mushrooms, then we'll do those last, so it looks like they are sitting over the big ones, right? We have to do a few different things to make the mushrooms look like they're in the front. So putting this dark color around the caps, I think, helps them to really stand out. And you can still put your shading in on the stem, the big stem. Just play with those different ideas of having the light where it sort of bends a little bit out, and the dark is more underneath there. You can see it's just sort of filling in that its own shadow with that really rich color, and just giving it some more texture. So everything has to really fit into the grass. And so at the bottom you can't just have a line. I mean, if you went and looked at the mushroom, you'd probably see there was a line of the mushroom edge, but looking at it like this, you want it to look like it's sitting naturally in the grass. So it's going to be darker down there. So that's why I brought in the dusk green. And that's the one that I continue to just sort of use upward flicks so that it looks like it's over top of the stems of the mushrooms. And then just going in between, I want to make sure that the green goes right up to the edge of the stem. I had to wait for the stems to dry a little bit before I did that. But it's dark where those mushrooms meet in the ground, so you want to have your darkest pigment there. And then you'll have a little bit of dark in the front as well. So I ended up painting the 3 small mushrooms in the front to be a little bit darker than what you might sort of view them here. But the idea is to take that brown into the grass as well. Just having all those shapes in there, the edges meeting. That's really good to keep it, I think, dark in the back, but dark in the front too. So you've got to have a few different levels of tone, right? Especially if you're using one color. And just sort of figuring out where would that light be creating a light. So what I decided was that the left side, where it sort of sticks out a little bit, might be light. But I sort of had to play with that before I realized it. There's a little bit of a light shadow there. But just going up underneath the cap, I think, with really dark is so impactful. Those little cracks that would be dark. And so just starting on the second stem, putting some nice clean water on there and just going around the caps. And we're just going to follow the same sort of routine that we did for the small ones and the large one. Lots of texture, blocks of light, blocks of shade, shadow, and this really rich chocolate brown. And you can just imagine these mushrooms growing out in the rainforest. They start to grow, and they're just amazing how many different species you come across. Different colors and shapes and sizes. Some are microscopic. It's just incredible. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So once we get the stem finished, we'll do the caps, and I did work on them a little bit after the camera stopped, so you can sort of have a look and just see, but basically they were too white when I stopped, and so I ended up putting more pigment on them. And it's funny, I had to put the pigment on, take it off, put it on, take it off to get that right mix. But I certainly had fun with this one. We did mushrooms last year, but they're completely different. And I think that maybe that's the plan, is just to keep painting mushrooms, but do different ones every time. And they certainly do have a wonderful sort of fun look to them sometimes. They're pretty amazing. The forest wouldn't exist without mushrooms. There's a whole network of webbing of their mycelium that go underground, and that's how they feed off of rotting materials. So in the forest there's lots of wood rotting, and that's what they do is grow from that nourishment. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, so just quickly putting on the caps, and as I mentioned, they do look quite a bit more brown in the finished picture. I ended up putting in another snail there, and I think it probably could have been just perfectly fine with just one snail, but yeah, we ended up doing another one there. And now I'm just finishing up the grass and giving it a nice little patch to come from, so that it actually does look like a realistic patch of mushrooms in the forest. So I hope you've enjoyed that. There's a few different renditions included here, and love for you to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It certainly helps me, and it's just a way to show my appreciation to you to keep posting these. I love sharing these different pictures that we make every week. We've got the paint circles every Thursday, and we've got the YouTube video. We've got the free templates on the website now, which is fun. So I'm trying to post as many of the templates as I possibly can for you. So yeah, just continue to let this beautiful rendition grow with more little, I think, dark little jaggedy pieces really help to bring this one to life. And that's what you see me doing now, is just taking in those little edges that I think might be filled with the darker color, and you know, just bits and torn mushroom on the edges. That's really what they look like in nature. So I'm moving color around from one mushroom to another. A little bit more on the caps there. Trying to figure out if there's any shadows on the tops of the caps, and just trying to keep it all balanced and making sense. Well, there's quite a bit of paint go on there, but I think I put on more even afterwards. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It's as I said, it's fun to do, and it's fun to see you on Thursdays, and it's great to see comments too. So love to hear how you're doing, where you're calling in from, where you're seeing this from, and we'll connect again with the next video. Take care. Happy painting.